Hello and welcome to episode 24. Today we're going to talk to you about the impact of war, and without further ado, Sailesh, what's up? Israel Gaza. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, sad, but there's a huge humanitarian crisis which is unfolding. So one of the biggest reason is the Palestinians are forced to being moved south, and Israel closed the Rafah border. So and they're not allowing any of the Palestinians to move into the country with all these rockets barging in on them and all that. So because Israel started the ground invasion, right? So there is a huge push towards it, but the problem is they're getting stuck right there.
Right, and this was true with
And on
Ukraine
top
as
of
well.
that, yeah. So on top of that, Hamas uses these civilians as human shields, right? So
Yeah.
that's another big problem. They hide behind civilian walls. So Ukraine, the advantage with Ukraine was Ukrainians were able to move into the other European countries, right? So only the people who were actually stuck there were like who actually wanted to stay there, or or they were forced to stay there. But most of Ukrainians could move into different parts of Europe.
Honestly, with the Ukrainian war, there were individuals that were based out of other countries that were flying back to Ukraine to fight in the war
Mm,
because there was a strong sense of nationalism. There was a strong sense of Russia
yeah.
can't just come in and take away our country. They annexed Crimea like it was nothing, and there was no consequence at
Mm.
that time. Today, Ukraine is fighting tooth and nail, and it's it's a little unfortunate that it's gone on for over a year. It's going to be nearly 2 years now, right? Like it's been a year and a half.
So if you look at both these Ukraine and Israel and Palestine war, Ukraine was a pretty big country, man. You can spread out, and Russia was not attacking everything. Russia was simply attacking, certain strategic locations. But here, if you look at the Palestinian Gaza Strip, it's only 41 kilometers, square kilometers, and the entire thing is heavily populated. So there's actually you cannot move out of the region wherever you want to go freely. How Ukrainians could move to the
Other European
unpopulated side of
nations.
Ukraine. Yeah, so that is a problem there.
There's nothing that can be
So
done in
that's
the Gaza Strip, I'm assuming, but
I mean, you are landlocked on one side, you're landlocked. The other side, you have water, and on the south you have the Egyptian Rafah border, where it's also closed. And Egypt brought a lot of their soldiers to protect its border from pouring in Palestinians. So there is a huge crisis there, more than the Ukraine. I would say the Palestinian crisis is more, more actually overblown.
overblown.
I mean, not over. I mean, it's like how would I say it? It's actually more,
Acute, more severe.
yeah, more severe.
Ah,
Yes.
damn it. I was like,
So yeah,
overblown.
sorry,
Right.
semantics, huh? Yeah.
Uh, yeah, man. Like, the impact
So
on the people on the ground is immense. It's terrible. But let's speak to the people who are participating in the war, the people who are fighting in it, the military and the families. With
mm,
Ukraine,
so
with Russia, it's been insane. Russia, I
I
think,
mean,
sorry.
if you look at it, there's a lobbying which goes on, right? So the entire thing, I would say, there's a lot of special interest groups which actually are involved in this war. So you have the military industrial complex, which is being funded in America by the American government, right? So there's a lot of money which goes in. If you look at the shares of these, you know, companies which like Lockheed Martin, the salt, all these companies shot up. So the share price of these companies shot up. So there is special interest groups which are actually promoting this kind of war. So I mean, I'm not saying they promote it, but they actually profit off of this war, right? So there is a lot of profiteering which is going off of, the Israel Palestinian war. It happened
let's
during the Ukraine war too.
let's definitely circle back to this because that's a large topic. But what I was meant
Hmm.
was the military and their families.
Mm.
Yeah, so
So
with them, like
the go ahead. Sorry.
with them, like after the World War, you had Russia at like the males in Russia. There was a severe dearth of them because they'd all gone to
Hmm.
fight in the two great wars, and the Russian population suffered because of that. You're going to see the same thing. You are seeing the repercussions already, where there are people who are trying to not get conscripted by either injuring themselves or something of that sort, just to prevent them from having to take part in this particular war. And it's already extended over a year and a half, so it can't be easy on the troops and on their families. And today, like back when the world war was being fought, it was predominantly men. Today you have men and women. I think still predominantly men, because and that might be lack of information on my part, but yeah, it is a severe, it has a severe impact on the populace in general. These people could have been working, like these people could have been employed in manufacturing or consulting, or I don't know, I go with consulting because I'm in consulting, but like they could have been, like there are people who are coming back to the Ukraine war, like people who were in fashion, people who were in politics, right? Like there were people who were pursuing other healthy careers, and then now they're forced to defend themselves or fight for their lives. So it's just tearing people apart and their families as well. Like imagine having to lose a loved one who's fighting down on a war that you can't comprehend or you can't understand the impact of because someone said you have to fight this war. The Hamas, of
Yeah, I
course,
agree.
they overstepped. Like the kidnappings and such that you hear of, kidnappings and torture that you hear of, is something that needs to be curbed. And I hope that the war is short. The worst thing that can happen, like war is bad, but what's worse than a war is prolonged warfare. That's what you see in Ukraine and with Ukraine and Russia right now. I hope Israel Gaza does not number that.
Yeah, the Israel Gaza, there are going to be a lot of bloodshed in Israel Gaza too, because if you look at it, there are about Israel asked about 300,000 reserve troops to come in, right? So most of them are men. So, like you said, a lot of male population going to be affected, even in Israel. It happened in Russia. It's happening in Russia and Ukraine, and it's going to happen in Israel too. So there will be casualties. There will be a lot of but the thing is, if you look at it overall, I hope the Israel does it with the least amount of casualties. So
Right. So you were talking about the impact on of lobbying the military industrial complex. So let's circle back to that.
hmm.
It's
So
not
yeah, I
just these
mean,
companies, right? Like these companies aren't like the people in that work for these companies. They're just working for these companies. It's not that they are looking at
yeah,
warmongering, but at the same time, they are benefiting out of that. You have politicians who
sure.
are voting on this, right? Politicians who are voting on budgets. Politicians who are voting on sending troops to a specific strategic area. They are allowed to own shares. Granted, they say that these are blind trusts that invest for them, but irrespective, like when you're looking at when
Yeah.
you look at their portfolio, and that's publicly available. But when you look at their portfolio, what was it called? QuiverQuant, right? QuiverQuant.com
Yeah. We were
uh,
going. Yeah.
has their portfolios up. But when you look at their portfolios, you see exposure to war, you see exposure to I mean, like it's typical. Like if I can make money out of it, like
Hmm.
why wouldn't I invest in it? And if I'm controlling a trust, why wouldn't I invest in that? Yeah. What are your thoughts? Like,
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, it's both sides of the table, right? So you have the Republicans and Democrats actually investing into the special interest companies which actually fund them. These companies actually lobby these politicians to get elected, and passing legislature to send massive amounts of money to other countries for war purposes. Like, if you look at it, that was the biggest tussle which happened a few weeks ago, right? So a week ago, when the speaker got ousted because Kevin McCarthy was in favor of supporting and sending money to Ukraine, another $4 billion, and that was the fight was between the neocon Republicans and the MAGA Republicans who didn't want to send money to Ukraine. So that's when the part of lobbying comes into play, which is huge. Most of these companies, give money to politicians to elect them.
right, but there's nothing that we can do about lobbying. There's precious little that we can do to stop these people from doing what they're already doing. But I, I would make the argument for this, like and this isn't necessarily leading to just the military industrial complex, but the world in general. We pursue growth and we pursue growth aggressively. But if we aren't
Hmm.
willing to take steps back and then allow for degrowth, you are always going to pursue a target that is becoming increasingly untenuous. Like spending,
Yeah,
I believe Raytheon got, if I remember correctly, but one of these military companies, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, they got Pentagon contracts worth 40, 50 billion dollars, $80 billion. The Pentagon's budget is what, 10 times that, and that's a lot of money to spend on the destruction of life. That's money that
yeah.
you could spend. Like I believe a congresswoman made the argument that you could have spent the same money feeding children, like one of those not feeding children, it was one of those education programs, like 120,000 children for a specific education program, which is immense. Like the point is to consider how much we spend on the destruction of life versus on the betterment of the quality of life that we have. It is insane. Like, and if we don't, like, if a missile is priced at $1 billion today, it is likely to increase. It is not likely for it to go the other way because everybody wants growth. That's something that I
True,
think
but
as a world, as human beings, we need to work on.
I mean, awareness, right? So people have to be aware of this. The more we talk about it, a lot of more people talk about this stuff, and they get educated that these special interest groups are actually fueling this, excessive money being pumped to, a lot of these, what do you call, war company like Lockheed Martin and stuff. So that will change how they're actually getting elected. So yeah, so that's another major thing we can talk about. But
Yeah.
what do you think about the impact on markets with war impact on markets?
Historically, when there's been a declaration of war, markets crash. But this was something that we were
Mm-hmm.
discussing when Israel Gaza broke out. I
Mm.
remember we were talking about whether the market would crash or not. And my argument was let's see what is impacted. With Ukraine and Russia, the impact was clear. You have on one side a nation that's supplying is sort of the breadbasket of the world, and on the other side, a
Mm.
nation that supplies the ingredients required to create fertilizers, pesticides, and energy, of course. So,
Yeah.
all things considered, that's a massive impact on the global supply chain, on on key components as well, on key commodities.
Yeah.
Whereas in Russia, Gaza, not Russia, pardon me. Whereas in Israel, Gaza, Israel, it looked like they primarily exported, like a Google search yielded that they primarily exported diamonds. And while diamonds have
Mm.
industrial uses, it's not just buy shiny rings. Um, while they have industrial uses, it's the damage is limited. Like you're not going to see
Yeah.
massive impact. Where you could see impact from, I think, is if the Middle East steps in, if the Middle East feels like they need to intervene,
Mm.
because they control energy, they control oil, and as long as we as a world are oil dependent, that's something that we are going to have to be concerned about globally.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, it was contained, right? The Israel and Palestine war was contained, so which actually didn't it didn't spread into the other parts of the other countries. So which actually didn't it didn't act, the market didn't crash as much as we thought it would crash, right?
It
I
didn't
thought it's
crash at all,
gonna take
right?
a nosedive. Yeah, it didn't crash. It was just one day dip and it came back. So it wasn't like everything crashed. The only companies which crashed were like Israeli defense companies which crashed. But American defense companies shot up.
Interesting.
Yeah, so yeah, that's I think that would be one of the impacts on the market, right? So, but every time something like this happens, oil always becomes volatile, right? So the oil was actually on a downward trend, which actually took off. It's at $91 a barrel, right? So it goes from going down all of a sudden a sharp rise.
Oil has always been volatile because, and I think people consider that because you have a bunch of nations, like a coalition of nations that control oil production. So long as they are
Yeah,
producing oil, I think the world doesn't need to worry. But since there are a handful of nations that do produce the oil and control production, oil is volatile. That's why we didn't peg currencies to oil. But with respect to war specifically, again, like as long supply chain and then use of oil for to fund the war, like you're going to have to bring food in for your troops. You're going to have to carry troops to this place, like you had mentioned earlier. You were talking about U.S. naval fleets traveling to participate in this war to support Israel.
yeah,
At those points in time, you are going to consume oil. There is going to be, you aren't going to have ships just dart around. Like in certain cases, like if, uh, like with the South China Sea as an example, there were conditions where free movement there was a problem, like with potential uh, well, not just naval drills, military drills. Like you had uh,
yeah.
flights flying around, like conducting whatever reconnaissance drills, whatever they felt like. It is not the safest of arenas. And now, because Europe is anti Russia right now, Russia is taking the long way around. Like Russia's, or the short way around rather. Like I think Europe is the long way around. They're going the shorter route
Hmm.
and delivering
Yeah.
oil to China, to wherever else they supply. They're risking the tundra for that. But there's that.
So you want me to tell you something really fascinating?
Always.
So America, Dwight Eisenhower, right? So he goes to Europe after World War II, right? So he thinks like, what's going on? Why are Germans so efficient in moving their military equipment? Is because of autobahns, right? So he brings this idea, and he actually makes
Freeways.
legislation. Yeah. So they are built so well. Like his idea was to be able to move any like if America is hit with war, you can actually move these tanks on the freeway. They're capable of holding that much amount of weight on it, and you can land airplanes on it. You can land C-130s on it. So it's so strong So the idea behind it is like, is can war be infrastructure as a consequence of war? So this is also happening in India. Like recently they landed, they did a the national highways were actually revamped, and they were able to land a C-130 on some of the national highways. I think actually in NH16 close to us.
Okay. I was going to
Yeah.
say, like before you said this, I wasn't aware of it, but before you said this, I was thinking about flyovers in Calcutta and how they collapsed.
Oh
So
man.
you're talking about riding tanks on freeways, and then there's this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Like there are certain instances where infrastructure is just disgusting, and it makes you question how, why, considering the size of a country, considering the economy that we live in, why infrastructure has to be subpar. But wow, that is interesting.
But it isn't going in the proper direction, right? So there is a revamp of infrastructure in Ladakh for strategic purposes. So because we have skirmishes with the Chinese army, we have the Pakistan on this side.
China's
So
built
that
villages
that
along
actually,
the border, and they've improved road infrastructure
mm,
so they have quick access to the border. So India has to respond. India has to widen their roads.
yeah,
India has to drill through tunnels so that it's easier for tunnels. Why did I say drill through tunnels? Drill through mountains to create tunnels so that they have quicker
yeah.
access. Drill through tunnels.
I mean that is a you that is a phenomenal thing, man. It's coming. It's good to see that India's doing it.
I was
So
like when I
if you
traveled to Switzerland in 2009 or
Mhm.
so, 2007, so a while back, 16 years ago. I remember thinking to myself that, like, Araku, right? Like the hill station that's close to
Yeah.
Vizag. There are a bunch of these,
Hmm.
like India has Uti, it has uh, Sikkim, Gangtok, and I've been to a bunch of these hill stations. I've traveled by road
Yeah.
to a bunch of them, and there's always like this winding route. Araku's quite possibly, uh, it is terrible, but like the journey, I mean, but
Yeah.
like the cart roads, they're not fun to drive on. But in Switzerland, like you're just
Yeah.
going through tunnels, and I remember thinking to myself, like this was so impressive. I wish we had more of this in India, and if the military is pushing for it, that's something that would be good for tourism as well.
Yeah. It's actually really good. Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, actually military brings in a lot of stuff for civilian use, right? So military brings in technology. So if you talk about that, we have technologies like the GPS, Global Positioning System, which was actually designed by the military, which is now civilian use. There are many in technologies like that. What do you think is something like that in your mind? Do you have anything in mind which came from military?
That's a very specific question, which leads me to think that you have something in mind. So please go ahead. The GPS, I was just
No, no. I
thinking like
mean
China's
the
outdated
GPS. The internet was actually created
for
by
emails.
military, right? So
For emails,
yeah,
yeah.
so they had that Advanced Research Projects Agency network, which actually created internet. In the 70s, I guess 60s, 70s, where is the internet built, and which actually eventually came into the civilian networks and it proliferated here. There's other stuff like I think the bug spray was created by the military
Really?
for mosquitoes. Yeah. So I mean, if you go like during the Vietnam War, they
Mm.
had to go in and there was a bunch of these mosquitoes, right? So they had to create bug spray.
Huh.
So that was another huge thing. I think it was during um, the Vietnam War, I believe. I'm not sure exactly when it was, but yeah, bug spray was created by U.S. Army.
I just googled this. You have blood transfusion, EpiPens,
Hmm.
jetpacks, freeze drying, canned foods, lots of stuff.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
But anyway,
technology can, or yeah, I mean, military can be, a initiator to create technology, right? That's something we
I think
can
I think we'd made
we
this.
can see in multiple instances.
I think we'd made this argument in the podcast before the last one, the one on
No, not the
socialism and
podcast. Yeah,
the socialism versus
yeah.
capitalism sort of thing, where I said that it is need oriented. Like anybody can be
Yeah,
creative, provided that there is a need for it. So yeah, and like considering the
yeah.
circumstances that the military needs to endure, uh, there is high need. So yeah, that's amazing.
Hmm. Yeah, that's I think we covered most of it. Any other thoughts you had?
No, like when I was thinking of war, I was primarily thinking about the markets and then
Mm,
the people that are hurt by those were my two key focuses. I'd love to hear from the audience what they think
yeah.
are key things that war impacts. What we talked about
Please
today
comment,
was
guys, if you have anything.
yeah. So what we talked about today was
Yeah,
technology, the impact on technology, the impact on infrastructure, uh, markets, people,
markets.
and of course the companies
The,
that fund all of this.
yeah.
Anyway, so what are we talking about next time around?
That's your topic. You wanted to talk about something very, very
Yeah, so
um
I was
interesting, right?
watching. Uh, so I recently subscribed to Apple TV Plus, and like I've got
Uh-huh.
Netflix, I've got Disney Hotstar, I've got. I don't use Sony Live as much, except for when I'm watching. Well, I'm a Manchester United fan, so it gets painful sometimes. Like we're finally back in the Champions League, but things aren't going very well. But Apple TV Plus, like the kind of shows that they've been creating are incredible. The production is fantastic, and I'm
Yeah,
very bullish about that. So I was hoping to talk about the economics of streaming. Disney's
sure.
looking at exiting India.
So you go from Netflix and chill to Apple and chill.
Disney's looking at exiting India. Apple's making a strong drive into streaming. They're planning on investing $1 billion a year towards
Yeah,
growing their presence there. So I think it's going to be an interesting
yeah,
topic.
for sure.
Cool. Okay then.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys. See
I
you on
hope
the
you
next
enjoyed
one.
everything. Please like, comment, and subscribe.
Yep. See you on the next one.